Hello, everyone. I'm Hailey. I'm a registered clinical counselor, and I'm back to kind of have a discussion around personality disorders. I thought it'd be really interesting to kind of do a bit of a deep dive into the 10 personality disorders that the DSM-5 recognizes and kind of just go like, what are the personality disorders? What are the 10 different ones? What encompasses each of the 10 different personality disorders, their characteristics, and like really just kind of have a better explanation because I think sometimes in society we may throw around some of these words, but we may not actually know what they mean. And I'm all about myth busting. So, like, if you're throwing out a word, like, let's try and know what it means and how it has an impact on others and what individuals who may have a personality what they may experience in that disorder. And so, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of maybe talk about first, like, what is a personality disorder? And so we all have personalities, which basically means that it's a collection of our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and the things that we just basically do over time. So, for example, someone who may be tidy, for example, they may really value cleanliness, hygiene, they may like to be really organized, and those traits encompass a characteristic of tidiness, a part of their personality. But it doesn't mean that if they value being tidy, that they're tidy like 100% of the time. It is on a spectrum of terms of like what that characteristic may mean. But as everyone joins today, I always want to say, like, I welcome any questions, any discussions that we can start, because I think, again, this is a great way for myself as a clinician to connect with different individuals all around the world and just kind of maybe break down some myths, have a good conversation, answer any questions, learn something new. I think it's a great way to spend a Thursday. So when we talk about personality disorder, we would just could describe it and define it as a way of thinking, feeling, and behaving that deviates from the expectations of the culture, causes stress or problems functioning, and it lasts over time. So I'm going to really break that down because if you think about it, we all think, we all feel, we all do, but like, when does that become a personality disorder? So when it says like deviates from the expectations of the culture, so every different culture has like different expectations or the ways that we do things. So in Western culture, we are a little bit more individualistic. So it'd be very normal for us to maybe prioritize ourselves over other people. And that's totally okay. That just may be like way Western culture is emphasized. Maybe in Eastern culture, it's more of a collective norm. So it'd be very common for maybe multiple different families, like grandparents, parents, and kids to all live in the same home versus that may be a little bit more uncommon in some like traditional Western homes. And so when it deviates from the expectations of cultures, our behavior, our traits, our ways of thinking, that is when we can actually go, okay, things are starting to be a little unusual. And it doesn't mean unusual just once, because that's where that kicker comes in. Lasts over time. It's like that unusualness of behaviors that is consistent. The other piece that I mentioned was causes distress. So, for example, like if you're tidy, great. But if you're tidy so much to the point that you're unable to get other needs met, then that's where it breaches into causing distress for you. And so you're no longer to get the things done that you need to. It really causes a lot of conflict, or it may affect your physical health in a poor way, or even your mental health in a poor way. And it also says like problems functioning. So, like, can you uphold employment or school or volunteering, whatever it may be? Or can you get your tasks done, your chores, or can you do fun, enjoyable activities? So, again, a personality disorder is that way of thinking, feeling, and behaving that deviates from the expectations of culture. It causes distress or problems functioning and lasts over time. And so, as we deep dive into all the different personality disorders today, you'll see how all of these different definitions and subtypes of personality disorders fit into that definition. Because, for example, like I'll use myself as example. I'm grateful I don't have a personality disorder. I seem to get along well with the way the world is. But what's interesting with that is like I'm able to do I have a certain personality, right? Like, and some of my personality traits get emphasized in my role as a clinician, but none of those things are really causing me distress and nor are they lasting over time. It's like, it's really why this is important to notice that things. Because sometimes, for example, people might throw around the word like borderline personality disorder. It's like, she's so borderline. It's like, okay, well, like, what does that even mean? And shouldn't we not be more conscientious of the impact that those words have and like what it means for someone to live like that. So we're going to go down through all the different ones. So I see some people joining in the chat, and I just want to say hello, welcome, glad you're here. Feel free to ask questions. I know that it takes a few minutes for everyone to come in and join us, but feel free to ask any questions along the way. So the DSM, pros and cons, I will admit it, there's some good things with the DSM and there's some not so good things, but we're going to use it because it helps us to really define the different personality disorders. So the DSM is the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, and it's meant for mental health, for us to be able to determine what's normal and abnormal. So both the DSM and so within the DSM, any personality disorder diagnosis might meet the following criteria. So it's an enduring pattern of inner experience and behavior that deviates markedly from the expectations of the individual culture, like I mentioned. So, and that might be in the way of cognition. So cognition is everything that's going on in our mind. It's the ways that we perceive and interpret ourselves, other people, and events. So for example, say something really awful happens, right? If we perceive it as something that's even more awful than what really happened, that's where that distortion happens. Or if we perceive it as something that didn't even happen at all, that could be something that's going not so great within our personality. It also affects our affectivity. So our affectivity is like our range of emotions. So if you really think about it, if you guys can like think for a second, it's like, sometimes have you ever felt sad, but you felt like a little sad or like a lot sad? It's again, that spectrum and range of emotions. And it's also the appropriateness of emotional response. So I remember one of my psychology teachers way back when said, it's like, if you go to a funeral and you start like crying of laughter instead of generally being maybe calm or sad or whatnot, that would be like a symptom or a behavior and like an emotional response that would be abnormal for the situation. It's not saying, of course, like if we now put in context that there's like a joke, like it would make more sense at that, if you know, to have a laugh or whatnot. But if you were at the moment where it's really sad and you're laughing, that's where maybe some deviations in personality are happening. And it also can affect our impulse control. So how quickly or easily we do things, and our interpersonal functioning. So inter between us is like how well you get along in relationships with other people. It doesn't mean just romantic relationships, it's any types of relationships. So the next piece would be the enduring pattern is inflexible and pervasive across a broad range of personal and social situations. So what that means is that that pattern of behavior is pervasive, which means it's like spreading everywhere, it's consistent, and it happens in multiple different situations. So maybe you're not only laughing at a funeral, but you're also laughing in the middle of a serious work meeting, perhaps, like, and it's nothing really humorous that's happening, but you're perceiving it as humorous, right? And then it's also talking about the enduring pattern leads to clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. And so what that means is like, are you able to do your job appropriately? Or are you able to show up for friends' hangouts and have a good time in that way as well? And so the pattern is stable and of long duration. So it doesn't mean that just for a few weeks that's happening. It's like happening for many months and many years. And it's also usually traced back into at least adolescence or early adulthood. So some psychologists theorize, Freud, for example, that personality is developed in childhood, which would make a lot of sense. We are of our parents or those who raised us and the way that we're socialized. So if our parents maybe struggled with their personality or appropriateness in certain situations, you as well may also struggle in that way. And a trauma-informed approach would say something really hurtful has happened in our childhood, we're more likely then to behave in ways that are unhelpful, that affect our cognitive or affects, interpersonal functioning, impulse control, etc. And the next part is that the enduring pattern of behavior, cognitions, and emotions are not better explained as a manifestation or consequence of another mental disorder. And so what it means is like, if you were, say, suffering from depression, and that doesn't mean that you would have a personality disorder because there's similarities within that, but they're different. So I also want to bring up a really great point is just, I want to segue here, is like, there's a difference between a personality disorder and a mood disorder. So mood disorders such as bipolar or depression are about patterns in people's emotions, while personality disorders are more centered in the ways that people relate to others. So That one's a big one. So I'll break that down a little bit. Mood disorders is like the fluctuations in our moods, happy, sad, angry, irritable, etc. And it's in that pattern in that way. So someone who is bipolar may, for example, have periods of high moods or low moods. And then also versus personality disorders are more centered on the ways people relate to others. So for example, if I'm laughing at a funeral, there's going to not be likely that other people are going to like relate to me in that moment. They're going to be like, wait, what? Why are you laughing in a funeral? That's like very inappropriate. Like, I don't understand what's funny. So there's lack of relatability. And sometimes I think it's unfortunate because individuals who may suffer from a personality disorder may get really outed or excluded, or there's a lot of otherness within them because their behaviors are not relatable. And so as humans, we try and have connection and inclusion and fit in with others. But if we feel someone is different than us, sometimes we generally push them away. And so that might be a really hurtful thing that could happen. So those are kind of like the different pieces of like what's difference between a mood disorder and a personality disorder, and also the general criteria that makes up diagnosis of a personality disorder. So I think that's important to kind of get that down pat a little bit. So that was a lot. So feel free to ask questions if you do. But what I really want to do again is deep dive into the 10 different main personality disorders. So those are grouped into different clusters. And what they mean by clusters, it's like, I don't know if you've ever had like Skittles and then you separate them by colors, right? And then you eat one color at a time. It's kind of like that. It's like all of the similar colors or symptoms or behaviors into one section. And so then they group them appropriately because they're similar but different within that. So for example, like there is the paranoid personality disorder, schizoid, schizotypal, antisocial, borderline, histrionic, narcissistic, avoidant, dependent, and obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So we're going to break down all of that. So if it would be okay, I would love to just show a little Venn diagram here of the cluster A personality types. So the cluster A personality types are those first few that I listed. And the way that we can really categorize them is that they are the odd or eccentric disorders. So I know that seems weird just to like limit it into two adjectives to describe it, but those are the paranoid personality disorder, schizoid personality disorder, and schizotypal personality disorder. So those three ones are like the odd and eccentric thinking. And within that cluster, right, we have those three different ones. So I thought I would break down the three different ones within there. And so the first one is the schizoid personality disorder. So people with schizoid personality disorder have a lifelong pattern of indifference towards others and social isolation. So what that means is that person who has this personality disorder would mean is that they're more okay being maybe alone. They're like, if I'm alone, no big deal. And again, it doesn't mean that you just only have that one symptom, right? But that's just their pattern of behaviors that revolve around that type of behavior, thoughts, and emotions. And they also have indifference towards others. So if they see someone, they may not be super excited or like interested in it. They just may go, okay, like I'm alone. That's okay. I'm not really interested. And they may just have that neutral affect, that neutral emotional response. And so to have a diagnosis of schizoid personality disorder, you have to have at least 4 of the following present. And so there would be no desire or enjoyment of close relationships. So we could even like be a little judgy for a second. We could say that person's maybe a bit of a loner. You know, they may not really want to have a close relationship. They may unlikely to have like a close romantic relationship. They really prefer solitary activities. So they may play like single person tennis, just kidding, instead of doubles. Just kidding about that one. Or they have little, if any, interest in sexual activity with others. And they have enjoyment of few, if any, activities that involve anyone at all. Again, lack of close relationships, except possibly like maybe immediate relationships like parents or siblings. They might have a relationship with them because they're more comfortable. And they aren't really like driven by like praise. So like a compliment or criticism, like negative feedback. They're really indifferent with that. They're just like more ingrained in themselves and like focus on themselves than other people. And sometimes they may be emotionally cold, detached, or have a flattened affect. So flattened affect means it's like they don't have the peaks and valleys of emotions of like a normal person would. It's more flat overall. So to be able to, again, to have that schizoid personality disorder, you would have to have at least 4 of those. So I know you're like, schizoid, a new word today, but again, we're just going to go through all the different personality disorders so we have a base understanding of some of them. Schizotypal personality disorder, again, going to be similar, but some differences, is someone who prefers to keep their distance from others and are uncomfortable in relationships. So the main difference there between schizotypal and schizoid is schizotypal is uncomfortable versus schizoid, I would be like, they're meh. They're like indifferent whether they have a close relationship or not. So that's like the uncomfortableness with it versus like neutrality, like leave it or take it kind of attitude. So schizotypal only really affects, they say, around 3% of the US population. So it's not a large amount of people who do have a personality disorder for this type. And they sometimes have odd speech or behavior, and they may have an odd or limited range of emotions. And so schizotypal personality disorder is the middle of a spectrum of related disorders. So with schizoid personality disorder on the mild end, and then schizophrenia on the more severe end. So that's kind of in the middle of the 3. And usually in each cluster, there are 3 different personality types. So this is all cluster A. And so when someone says like cluster A personality types, it's again that odd or eccentric kind of behavior. It would be eccentric in many ways to be like that person is not really interested in social relationships, because as humans, we're meant to be in like packs and connected and whatnot. And so if someone were to have a diagnosis of schizotypal personality disorder, they would have to have at least 5 of the following. So ideas of reference. So notions that everyday occurrence has special meaning or significant personally intended for or directed to themselves. So like, here's a silly example. Mondays, best day of the week. Mondays are for, I don't know, I can't even think of like one. And it's like Mondays are for something specific, right? Or every 10th of June is this, or, every day has something that is, they're important to them individually, which is kind of the odd eccentric behavior. They may have, an odd belief or in magical thinking. So they may believe in clairvoyance, to telepathy, or a sixth sense. So they may think that they can tell the future, or they may know when they're going to win the lottery, things like that. Or they may have unusual perceptual experiences. So they may think that a voice is whispering their name, things like that. So again, this is a little bit maybe creepy perhaps, but it's interesting because like the difference between like schizotypal and like schizophrenia is that usually I always ask people, I'm like, if you're hearing a voice, are you hearing the voice inside your head or outside your head? If you're hearing it with inside your head in that weird, like inside it, it's yourself speaking, even if it sounds like a different voice. And that means that it's just a part of yourself speaking up and standing up, versus schizophrenia. Usually you hear a voice outside of your head, like it's coming from somewhere else. And again, yes, the voice is still from your brain, but it's that difference in inside versus outside that we can kind of tell the difference. For schizotypal, you would also maybe have to have odd thoughts and speech. So you might speak that is like vague or metaphorical, excessively elaborate, or stereotyped. Suspicions or paranoid thoughts. So you might think like things are out to get you, or this might hurt you, or you might think people are always talking about you. Or you might have limited affect. So limited affect would be this, like, again, not high peaks and values, just pretty neutral, similar again to the first one, but a little bit different. And odd, eccentric, or particular behavior and appearance, right? So you might dress in a way that is very, very unusual, or you might do things specifically really weird, like maybe you eat dessert first, but again, if I could eat dessert first, I would. Lack of close friends and confidence, except maybe again for the first degree relatives, parents, siblings. And you might have excessive social anxiety. This does not improve with familiarity. So it's like you may be really anxious, even though it's your best friend from the last 20 years, and is associated with paranoid fears rather than negative judgments about self. So what that means is you're more fearful that maybe your friends speaking poorly about you, versus that you think you're not good enough in that social situation. So that's what it means when excessive social anxiety that does not improve with familiarity and is associated with paranoid fears rather than negative judgments. So those would be all of the different symptoms that could show up in the schizotypal, but again, you would have to have the 5. So it's similar to the schizoid, but again, it's different. And so the other one would be the paranoid personality disorder. So the characteristics of a paranoid personality disorder include paranoia, which is thinking about something that might be happening, but really isn't happening. I think we maybe all been there where we're like, I thought that happened, but it really didn't. And also would be relentless mistrust. So you might have a really hard time trusting others. You must also be suspicious of others without adequate reason to be suspicious. So you're like, that person doesn't like me, but it's like, wait, there's no reason for them not to like you. And generally, they would say that paranoid personality disorder affects 2 to 4% of the general population. So again, it's quite small, but it is still prevalent enough for to take note of. And its causes is thought to be a combination of both biological and psychological factors. So they say that sometimes individuals who have paranoid personality disorder may have a close relative with schizophrenia, because again, there's similarities between schizophrenia and all of these cluster A personality disorders. And there might be childhood trauma, physical and emotional is also believed to be a contributing factor. And so a person who has paranoid personality disorder is more likely to have at least 4 of the following symptoms. So one of them would be unjustified suspicions that others are exploiting, injuring, or deceiving them. So it's like my friend of mine is stealing my money, or they're just only hanging out with me because I have a puppy, or a preoccupation with unjustified doubts about reliability of others. So you might not think people are going to show up for you, or reluctance to confide in others for fear that the information will be used against them. So you may not want to tell a friend about private information because you're worried that they might use it against you. Another one might be misinterpretation of benign remarks. So someone might say something and then you might be like, wait, what? Like, they're talking about me, or they might interpret it as something more when really it had no alternative motive or meaning. You might hold a lot of grudges against others for insults or injuries or slights. You often think that their character or reputation has been attacked and quick to react angrily or counterattack. And they also might have reoccurring unjustified suspicions of spousal infidelity. So they also might think that their romantic partner is being unfaithful if it's in a monogamous relationship. So those are the 3 different personality disorders within cluster A of the personality disorders. I just wanted to go back again to make some points around what the difference is between schizotypal personality disorder versus schizophrenia, because those are different. Schizophrenia has a large biological basis to it. But the primary differences between schizotypal personality disorder and schizophrenia include that schizophrenia includes hallucinations. So that's a key one there. So hallucinations are things that people may hear or see that aren't actually there. And delusions might be like, I am the queen of the world, right? And you might think that's a delusion. You might think something that is true that really isn't true. And also, schizotypal personality disorder often co-occurs with mood disorder. So generally speaking, if you have this, you're more likely to have like a depression, bipolar, etc. And schizophrenia rarely co-occurs with mood disorders. And treatment for schizotypal personality disorder may include the use of mood stabilizers, and therapy for schizotypal may really focus on like using different skills to manage all the symptoms they may have. So I'm just looking at the chat here and I see a question from Amit that is it bad if we identify with 1 or 2 of the symptoms in these clusters? No, because if you think about it, there's only I know it sounds kind of Inception-like, but there's only so many different behaviors in the world or like that humans can do. Right. And so that's why it's so important. I was like, you have to have 4, you have to have 5 of these. Like if you have many of those, then I would be like, number 1, don't panic. It's going to be okay. And number 2, like that's where you can reach out to a professional to support you with that. But if you align with 1 or 2 of those, I would definitely be like, it's fine. It's normal, because we can only do so many things. Like if I may be a little honest with you all, I've had moments where I feel as though something's going to happen when it really doesn't happen, right? And that's just maybe my intuition overreacting, or I maybe just a little bit fearful of something bad happening, or I'm like the one zipping people into life jackets before going in the lake. Like I'm like, put this on just in case, because I'm worried something bad's going to happen. But again, it's normal for us to have behaviors like this. These are all doing a purpose for us, right? Like if we went around and we're never, ever concerned ever what people thought of us, we may not be as kind or conscientious, and that may end up having some bad results from it. So it's okay to have some of these things. It's just when it's again, if we go back to the definition of a personality disorder, it has to be something that is deviates from the expectations of the cultures, causes distress or problems functioning, and lasts a long time, not just like for a little bit. So hopefully that kind of clarifies that a bit. So those are all the cluster A's. So if we move along to cluster B, this one's juicy. Well, I shouldn't say that. This one gets a little bit more attention, perhaps. So cluster B personality disorders are characterized by dramatic, overly emotional, or unpredictable thinking or behavior. They include antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, and narcissistic personality disorder. What big buzzwords are those? I don't know about you guys, but within like social media and mental health, like those come up a lot. And so I thought it'd be really great to spend some time here and talk about each of them and what they are so that we have a good understanding of them. Because I think, again, I don't want people throwing around words that they don't understand what they are. And it's really important just to be conscientious and kind towards others, because if someone has a personality disorder, it doesn't mean that they are less than or that they're worse of a person. Like we have to be still really mindful to understand that we all go through human suffering, that we're all in this together in the world, and we should not treat other people in a poor way. So that's why I'm all about the information today. Give you lots of information so you have an understanding of what they are and the symptoms within it, so that you're not mislabeling or judging someone. So antisocial personality disorder is a disregard for others' needs or feelings. Persistent lying, stealing, using aliases, or conning others, reoccurring problems with the law, repeated violation of rights of others, aggressive, often violent behavior, and a disregard for the safety of self of others, maybe some impulsive behavior, and consistently irresponsible, and a lack of remorse for behavior. So if you have at least many of these, not just one or two of these symptoms, but many of these, it could be that. I'm not saying that I'm not diagnosing anyone, but that would be the things. And the reason why that happens with antisocial personality disorder is because there is a lack of regard for others and a lack of desire to be conscientious of others. And there isn't this need to be part of the collective whole. So I think that's a really great thing to point out there. And so I just think it's important to understand that, like, it isn't that antisocial personality disorder means that they don't care about anyone ever. It's just like they may feel a need to put themselves before others on a consistent basis over time. Borderline personality disorder. So this gets thrown around a lot. And to be honest, I don't think even borderline is even as prevalent as we may think it to be. So I think borderline, let me just get a percentage here. Prevalency. So they say that borderline only has a prevalence of 6%. So it's not even that high if you really think about it. I like, for example, if we go like prevalence of like diabetes or something, right? That would be like a lot more. That would be like 10%, I think it says 8.7 to 10%. So like to show like it's way more prevalent to have a lot of other things, but people assume that borderline is more prevalent just because of like, I think the stigma that goes along with it. Because individuals who have borderline personality disorder, they do suffer. They do are challenged, and it's a hard go of things. And it's really becomes prevalent within like relationships. And that's when we really notice it. So borderline personality disorder includes impulsive and risky behaviors, such as having unsafe sex, gambling, or binge eating, unstable or fragile self-image. So what that means is they may look at themselves that they may not feel very confident in themselves, or they may not have a clear idea who they are. They may have unstable and intense relationships. They may have up and down moods, so lots of peaks and valleys. See how this is really different than the cluster A? There's peaks and valleys happening in the mood versus this cluster A is a lot more flat, right? And it's also as a reaction to interpersonal stress. So usually relationship stress really creates that peaks and valleys. So someone with borderline not always, may repetitively text someone to get a response out of them because they're feeling really fearful of abandonment or losing the relationship. They may have suicidal behavior or threats of self-injury. They may have an intense fear of being alone or abandoned. They may have ongoing feelings of emptiness. They may have frequent intense displays of anger, and they may have stress-related paranoia that comes and goes. So if you think about it, within borderline, there is just a big challenge of regulating one's mood. That's like a really big piece of it. And from not being able to regulate one's mood comes the consequences of interpersonal relationships or being able to have distress tolerance. So the main therapy that's best for borderline would be the dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT. I love DBT. I use DBT all the time with different clients, and not because they have personality disorders or borderline. It's just because like those skills within DBT are super helpful. And a lot of them are really self-explanatory. So it wouldn't even be wrong for me to say, Google some DBT skills if you're looking for some good mental health skills, and you can use those. The other thing that is within the cluster B is the histrionic personality disorder. So histrionic personality disorder is someone who is constantly seeking attention. So they're always putting themselves in the limelight. They're excessively emotional, dramatic, or sexually proactive to gain attention. They speak dramatically with strong opinions, but with few facts or details to back them up. Well, I know this and this and this, but they have like no proof or evidence of such. They may be easily influenced by others. They may have shallow, rapidly changing emotions. They may have excessive concern with physical appearance. So really like appearance motivated, doing things to change the way that they look. And they think relationships with others are closer than what they really are. So they may feel like the relationship's closer, but in reality, it may not be. So those would be the different characteristics within histrionic. But again, it's not just one or two. You have to have many of these different symptoms and experiences to be possibly diagnosed with such. And again, you don't need to have a diagnosis of a personality disorder to be able to move forward in your life. It's just really important to go, look, if you're struggling with these different symptoms, then take some steps towards bettering your well-being. It doesn't mean you have to get a diagnosis, but if you do want to, great, go ahead. But it's more about taking actual change, doing things that are good for your overall biological health, social health, spiritual health, emotional, psychological health, so that you can live the life that you really feel like is going to be beneficial for you. The next one within cluster B is, again, big buzzword, narcissistic. So narcissistic personality disorder is the belief that you're special and more important than others. It also fantasizes about power, success, and attractiveness. There's failure to recognize others' needs and feelings, exaggeration of achievements or talents, expectations of constant praise and admiration. And there's also the arrogance aspect. So really kind of like, I'm the best kind of attitude, unreasonable expectations of favors and advantages, and often taking advantage of others, and envy of others or beliefs that others envy you. So I feel actually a lot of empathy for someone who has narcissistic traits or personality disorder, because what my understanding is that someone who is narcissistic is in truth really self-conscious, and they're not self-assured. They feel insecure, and that would just be such an uncomfortable place to be. And it's such a deep and insecure experience that it overcompensates into those different behaviors that I listed. And so we often like put someone who's narcissistic as the villain in our lives, but really it's like they're from their own suffering is where that suffering that they're giving out comes from. And what's really unfortunate is narcissistic personality disorder is extremely hard to treat, because in a counseling session, someone who is narcissistic may go, well, I'm the best, I don't need to do this coping skill, or they may feel like they need to dominate this counseling hour. So it takes a very skilled clinician and a really great rapport and willingness of that person to move past some of these challenges, but it is possible. It's just a little bit harder. So I'm often just really careful, again, to go back to that idea that we shouldn't really always other individuals who have personality disorders, and we shouldn't treat them poorly, but instead, like, let's have empathy, because we all are within that human struggle of existence, really. So again, those are the ones within the cluster B: narcissistic, histrionic, borderline, and antisocial. So the final cluster, cluster C, is that convenient ABC. So cluster C is the disorders that are characterized by anxious, fearful thinking, or behavior. They include avoidant personality disorder, dependent personality disorder, and obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So I actually have worked with an individual who had avoidant personality disorder, and it was really challenging because they really wanted to move forward in their life in a healthy, helpful way, but they were so avoidant and they had so much anxiety that they were unable to do the skills that would relieve anxiety. Their appraisal of the skill was that the skill was going to be so tough to do that they wouldn't even try, which was kind of really hard because like they really wanted to, but that emotional perception of the coping skill was just seemed to be too intense. So generally someone who has avoidant personality disorder would be too sensitive to criticism or rejection. So they're very little bit on edge, and they may feel inadequate, inferior, or unattractive. They may have avoidance of work activities that require in-personal contact. They may be socially inhibited, timid, and isolated, and they may avoid new activities or meeting strangers. So, for example, this client I worked with, it took around 3 or 4 months, and then we were able to build up enough confidence and anxiety minimizing skills so that they could try joining a new activity. There's a fear of disapproval, embarrassment, or ridicule. And so all of those different symptoms here are what would create the avoidant personality disorder. The next one would be dependent personality disorder. So someone who could have dependent personality disorder could have excessive dependence on others and feeling the need to be taken care of. So they might really feel like they're like the earth and everyone else is the sun, and they just have to revolve around it. They may be submissive or clingy behaviors towards others. So again, really focused on others. They may have fear of having to provide self-care or fend for yourself if left alone. There's a lack of self-confidence, requiring excessive advice and reassurance from others to even make small decisions. So they may be like, should I do this or that? But they really have to sink into their social connections to help them make that decision. They can't make independently. They might have difficulty starting or doing projects on your own due to lack of self-confidence. They may have a difficulty disagreeing with others and fearing disapproval, and tolerance of poor abusive treatment, even when other options are available. So they may know that something isn't going well, but they have the tolerance for it because they feel so dependent on that person or that situation. And they may have an urgent need to start a new relationship when a close one has ended. So they're unable to move forward without meeting someone new, maybe. So those are the different characteristics of dependent personality disorder. So again, there is that same symptomology as the avoidant, that are the anxious, fearful thinking or behavior, because there's a lot of fear within these behind all of this. That is like the main emotion that is driving these different behaviors. So the last one is obsessive compulsive personality disorder. That is different than obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD. So just gonna really make that sink in for a second. A personality disorder, again, is different than obsessive compulsive disorder. So obsessive compulsive disorder is an anxiety-based disorder. Obsessive compulsive personality disorder is a personality disorder. So difference, similar, but different. So someone who may have this personality disorder may have a preoccupation with details, orderliness, and rules. They may have extreme perfectionism, resulting in dysfunction and distress when perfection is not achieved, such as feeling unable to finish a project because you don't meet your own strict standards. So they might not even do a project because they're like, well, I won't be able to do it good enough, so I might not even try. So it's kind of stuck in that loop, which is, again, the fear of not doing well enough. They may have a desire to be in control of people, tasks, and situations, and inability to delegate tasks, and neglect of friends and enjoyable activities because of excessive commitment to work or a project. So they may be so fearful of not doing well in life that they over dedicate their time to their personal activities or their professional activities. And there's an inability to discard broken or worthless objects. So they may feel really attached to things in their home. So there might be a little bit of extra stuff going on, or things that they own, even if it's not working or there's no purpose to it anymore. And they might be really rigid and stubborn. And they have an inflexibility about morality, ethics, or values. So what that means is they may believe certain things and they may not be open to ever changing their mind about something that's like morality, ethics, like it's like right and wrong, or values like honesty, whatever it may be. And they might have tight, miserably controlled over budgeting and spending money. So they might be very particular on how they spend their money. So those are the different types within the cluster C personality disorders. Wouldn't it be amazing if I said I memorized all that? No, I did not. Sorry. It'd be fun if I did. But those are all the different types of behaviors and characteristics of all the personality types. So I really wanted to deep dive into it so that, again, we can be more aware of like what they are, why we're what like, and how they show up, so that we're not labeling in a way that is unkind or unjust towards others. And it's possible to have like someone like a psychiatrist be like, oh, there might be a bit of cluster B happening. What that means is there might be little symptoms and behaviors from all of like the different types of personality disorders within one cluster, but you may not have a full blown diagnosis of one. That can happen. And that's what it means when you have like a cluster of one of them. So let me just see where we're at. Emma's just self-diagnosing over there. So be careful with that. That can be a dangerous path. So we went through like what is personality. And I think we kind of went through most of them here. Yeah. So we went through all of the different personality disorders. So if we talk for a few minutes about like different treatments, again, dialectical behavioral therapy is wonderful for borderline. Any kind of anxiety-based treatment, such as like cognitive behavioral therapy, narrative therapy. I'm very biased. EMDR is great, though that can really help to alleviate some of the symptoms, because personality is not 100% fixed. Like we can change how we do like our personality by what we do, what we think, and what we feel. So if we directly put a lot of time and energy into the experience we're having and shift it, we can kind of alleviate some of these symptoms. And again, that's where it's kind of good and bad, like bittersweet. It's like good because there's change, but bittersweet because it does take a lot of time and energy. It just depends on your motivation to change and to move forward in a way that's really helpful. I think that's most of it I had to share today. Feel free to ask any questions because I would love to hang around here for a little bit. I know I kind of hit you guys over the head with a lot of different ideas here, but I think it's great to have a definition of like what each of these personality disorders are. Hopefully you learned something today, such as like there's 10 different types of personality disorders and how they show up, and that there is hope to be able to move forward. And I don't think like one personality disorder is better than the other, because they're all create conflict or discomfort or in different ways. So it's more about just like, if this is something that you're suffering from, it's like, what can you do to invest in this, right? Like, what can you do to help you relieve some of your symptoms? So I don't see any more questions there, but I'd love to just hang on for a minute here, a few minutes, and to see if anything comes up for us. Yeah. So a good question that came up was, who would we go to if we were looking to have a diagnosis? So I love the diagnosis debate. Do I need a diagnosis? Some treatments must have like a checklist, and they're like, to join our borderline personality disorder group, you have to have borderline because they want to best treat you. Like that's one thing, but it's actually like, this is my opinion, but like it's up to your personal preference if you actually want to have that diagnosis. Like if you have that diagnosis, how does it help you? How does it harm you? Right? But if you want to get a diagnosis, you would want to go to someone in BC, in Canada. It would be a family doctor, a psychologist, or a psychiatrist. In the States, I'm under the same understanding, could be wrong, is that you would want to go someone who has at least a doctorate degree, because they not only focus on how to treat different disorders, you could also do, they also not only the treatment, but they also know all the breakdowns, and they know how to look out for these things. Because like one of our questions was like, what if I align with some of these? It's like, yes, but that individual, the doctorate degree, would have the experience and education necessary to be able to determine, is this prevalent enough to actually be into a full blown like personality disorder versus just some traits that happen. Like I do some of these things, and like, that's okay. And everyone's going to have some of these things come up, like fear, or I might think someone thinks poorly of me on occasion, or, you know, like that is normal. But if I see in the chat here, I have another question that Sammy says, can you guys do a session on PTSD and CPTSD someday? Yes, I would love to do that. Please write that down. That would be great. Let's do that. Because I think that's a really more of a newer terminology that comes out with the CPTSD. So my understanding, PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder, and CPTSD is, I believe, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And so, yeah, that would be great, because they're, again, similar, but different. And I would love to talk about that because I love EMDR and I believe EMDR is like the best one for PTSD. So I would love to talk about that. So thank you. Great suggestion. Please also feel free to send us any suggestions on different topics that you guys would like to learn about, because that would be great. I want to give you guys what you want. Zach says, should you confront someone who you suspect is suffering from a personality to seek help? Also, where's the puppy? The puppy can come sometime, I hope. And could you confront someone you suspect is suffering from personality disorder to seek help? Well, that's the thing. It's like, do you stay in your lane or do you not? So like, what is your relationship with that person? Is that person harming you? Like, I believe that every human being should have the right to choose their actions and behaviors in this world. That's my belief. Agree or disagree. Therefore, it's up to them and whether they want to choose to seek treatment or not. But I think it's difference between confronting and supporting. So confronting would be like, you have a problem, right? Supporting would be is, I notice that it sounds like you're having a hard time. Would you like some support with that? Could I make a suggestion for you? It's more of that tentative, kinder, softer approach versus a confrontation. So you could, it depends, right? Because at the end of the day, you have a decision as an individual person, whether you want to be around that person or not. Like, that's kind of how that is. I know it sounds kind of bad, but like, again, you can choose who you want in your life and who you don't want in your life. And that person can choose whether they want to have support or not. Michelle asked, post-concussion syndrome symptoms are close to disorders. That is very true. So I actually have some experience working with individuals who've had concussions, and it is very similar. So it's actually kind of ironic because I've done assessments with individuals with concussions, and they may struggle with their memory, and they may have been, unfortunately, had a blow to the head in some ways, or a lack of oxygen to the brain that would give the like a brain, like a acquired brain injury. And therefore that part of the brain may have suffered, and therefore it creates like the anxiety, the fear, interpersonal challenges. Like, let me go through this list, pick out another one: up and down moods, ongoing feelings of emptiness, or they may think that they have a closer relationship, not because our mind controls our body. And if our mind's not doing well, all of our experiences are different. So yes, they are very similar to that. And that's a really great point. And that's what the challenge is I think that individuals, again, my opinion, but I think individuals who have suffered from a concussion or a traumatic brain injury or an acquired brain injury, they're really at like a disadvantage, because it's hard sometimes to work with those individuals because it's an acquired symptoms from that injury, rather than like just like a psychological experience only. And so there's such a big body mind connection. So it's hard to pull out what's the difference between those symptoms and what's happening from the mind. And so generally speaking, sometimes we have to help the body heal a little bit more before we can help some of the other mental symptoms. But then at the same time, if we help the mental symptoms, it could help the body more. So it's a really hard balance. And someone who has a concussion, it may not be visually evident that they're suffering, which I feel a lot of empathy for them, because wouldn't it be great that we could have a lot more compassion for like a hidden challenge, right? So that's a great point to bring up. So it's some really great questions there, guys. Thank you. I love the questions. Feel free to ask any more. I'll hold on for a bit here too. We have a few more minutes, but yeah, feel free to give us any suggestions on topics that you guys would like us to talk about. I'm more than happy to do research on something I don't know and share with you guys, because again, the more that we have understanding, compassion, grace, and empathy for mental health disorders and challenges, the more accepting we can be of them, and the more people are willing to have their health taken care of, right? And it doesn't have to be such a scary thing, because every time that we have an uncomfortable emotion, it usually creates this experience of alone and being alone and like lonely and loneliness and isolation. And the more that we have community and connection, the more those individuals can have the support that they really deserve and need. So please, give us your feedback, give us your thoughts, ask questions. That's kind of what this platform and this experience is for. And I just love hanging out with everyone. So that's always nice. So I'll just wait a couple minutes, see if anyone has anything else. I always feel like an awkward pause is a long pause, but it's not. That's me in my anxious appraisal of the situation. But so. And also happy Canada Day for all the Canadians out there tomorrow. Hope everyone has a great weekend. But I don't see any other questions. So if there's any other questions, feel free to reach out to us on Switch Research. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have. And I do see one last question coming in here. Michelle said, will a doctor be able to tell the difference between? So Yes and no. Worst answer. But the reason it's a yes and no is a doctor, if you think about it, all doctors go to like an undergrad and then they go to like medical school and residency, right? They all have that experience. But there's so many health challenges in the world that like it would be impossible for a doctor to be an expert in every area. So what I would really say is that someone who has a concussion or concussion symptoms, I would recommend a more holistic approach. And that means have a counselor, maybe have a psychiatrist, have your family doctor, maybe consider an occupational therapist or a physiotherapist, and all try and find those individuals who have experience in that area, because they all have the same education, but they may specialize in different ways. And so I think one of the best things that you could do if you are suffering from a concussion disorder would be to write down your symptoms, keep track of them so that it's easier to tease apart like what is concussion based or what is mental health based. Or you could also go, well, I struggled with anxiety before, so maybe that concussion amplified it. It's really about really being aware and trying to find like good things that would benefit you in every way. So for example, going for a walk if you're able to. Walks are good for your biological health. Walks are also great for your mental health. So it's like if you can hit two birds with one stone, one might as well. So again, go to the people that you feel like you're going to have some experience in that, because sometimes the doctors will and sometimes we won't. I know that unfortunately in BC that it's great that we have public health care, but they may not be as motivated always to help to tease apart the symptoms of what's from what. So it's just really about trying to be more holistic in that approach. Thanks, Amit. And I hope everyone has a great day, and feel free to shoot any more questions out to us, and looking forward to chatting with you guys next time.